Tiffany Mataji, Danvats Pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining the call. Hare Krishna. Is any?
Hare Krishna Mataji, Danvat Pranam. All glories to Prabhupada, all glories to Guru Maharaj, all glories to SML devotee. This is Mohini Lakshmi from Detroit.
Hare Krishna Mohini Lakshmi Mataji, Danvats Pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining the call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Vardhana Mataji, all glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharajis. My humble obeisances to you and all the devotees. This is Krishna Kumari Devidasi.
Hare Krishna Krishna Kumari Mataji, Danvats Pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining the call. Hare Krishna. Is anybody else would like to introduce themselves?
Hare Krishna. Ji Vardhana Mataji, Danvat Pranam. Srila Prabhupada, Srila Gurudev ki jai. Vrinda.
Hare Krishna Vrinda Mataji, Danvats Pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Vardhana Mataji, Dandavat Pranam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. This is Vinita Gandharvika Devidasi from Texas. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Vrinda Gandharvika Mataji, Danvats Pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much, Mataji, for doing wonderful chanting whole night, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Is anybody else would like to introduce themselves? I think Prabhuji is on the call, Mataji. Can we start recording?
1 second, Mataji. My computer got stuck.
Can
Can
I
you
start?
hear me, Mataji? Can
I
you
can.
hear me?
Yeah, I'm able to. Welcoming all of you to the Bhakti Sangha conference call. Today we are very fortunate to have His Grace Chaitanya Lila Prabhuji. Prabhuji is going to discuss on Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, 5th chapter, 14th verse. I'll hand out the call to Praveen Govind Prabhuji to give brief introduction of Chaitanya Lila Prabhuji. Hare Krishna Prabhu, are you on the call, Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Mataji, I'm here.
Praveen Govind Prabhu.
If Praveen Govind Prabhu is not there, then Tiffany Mataji can read.
Yeah, Tiffany Mataji. I'll hand out the call to you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. So we have Prabhuji with us today, His Grace Chaitanya Lila Prabhuji. Chaitanya Lila Prabhuji is a disciple of His Holiness Radhanath Swami. After completing his engineering studies from the University of Delhi and ITT Kharagpur, Chaitanya Lila Das gathered a few years of corporate work experience with an IT MNC in Mumbai. After that, he decided to serve the society at large as a resident monk at Sri Sri Radha Gopinath Mandir in Chowpatty. For the last 12 years, he has been actively involved in sharing the essence of our Vedic scriptures with others at a number of corporate, social, and educational enterprises. Back at the temple, he also has the temple IT department and assists in youth outreach. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany Mataji. Hare Krishna Chaitanya Lila Prabhuji, Dandavats Pranam, all goes to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for giving your valuable time and association to us this morning and enlightening us on the topic of Srimad Bhagavatam. I'll hand over the call to you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, are you able to hear me?
Yes, Prabhuji, we are able to hear you, Prabhu.
It's a bit raining out here, so maybe the sound will be clear as well. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are reading from Canto 5, Chapter 5, Verse 14. Karmashayam hridaya granthi bandham avidyaya sa ditamapramattah anena yogena yathopadesham samyak vyapohi prameta yoga. Word by word meanings. Karma ashayam, the desire for creative activities. Hridaya granthi, the knot in the heart. Bandham, bondage. Avidyaya, because of ignorance. Asavitam, brought about. Apramattaha, not being covered by ignorance or illusion. Very careful. Anena, by this. Yogena, practice of yoga. Yatha upadesham, as advice. Samyak, completely. Vyapohya, becoming free from. Uprameta, one should desist. Yoga, from the practice of yoga, the means of liberation. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Translation. As I have advised you, my dear sons, you should act accordingly. Be very careful. By these means, you will be freed from the ignorance of the desire for creative activity, and the knot of bondage in the heart will be completely severed. For further advancement, you should also give up the means. That is, you should not become attached to the process of liberation itself. Purport. The process of liberation is Brahma Jigyasa, the search for the absolute truth. Generally, Brahma Jigyasa is called Neti Neti, the process by which one analyzes existence to search out the absolute truth. This method continues as long as one is not situated in his spiritual life. Spiritual life is Brahma Bhuta, the self-realized state. In the words of Bhagavad Gita 18.54, Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na sochati na kamshati samah sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktin labhate param. One who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed to every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. The idea is to enter into the Parabhakti, the transcendental devotional service of the Supreme Lord. To attain this, one must analyze one's existence. But when one is actually engaged in devotional service, he should not bother seeking out knowledge. By simply engaging in devotional service undeviatingly, one will always remain in the liberated condition. Mam chayo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatiketan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Bhagavad Gita 14.26. The unflinching execution of devotional service is in itself Brahma Bhuta. Another important feature in this connection is Anena Yogena Yathopadesham. The instructions received from the spiritual master must be followed immediately. One should not deviate from or surpass the instructions of the spiritual master. One should not be simply intent on consulting books, but should simultaneously execute the spiritual master's order, Yathopadesham. Mystic power should be achieved to enable one to give up the material conception But when one actually engages in devotional service, one does not need to practice the mystic yoga system. The point is that one can give up the practice of yoga, but devotional service cannot be given up. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7.10, Atma Ramascha Muniyo Nirgranthi Api Urukrame Kurvanti Ahetukim Bhaktim Itham Bhuta Guno Harihi. Even those who are liberated, Atmaram, must always engage in devotional service. One should give up the practice of yoga when one is self-realized, but at no stage can one give up devotional service. All other activities for self-realization, including yoga and philosophical speculation, may be given up, but devotional service must be retained at all times. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manodhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Tadamriyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padkamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savdhutam Parigana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanitanscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. So today we are discussing from this fifth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 5, text 14. I'll just read the translation once again. As I have advised you, my dear sons, you should act accordingly. Be very careful. By these means, you will be freed from the ignorance of the desire for creative activity, and the knot of bondage in the heart will be completely severed. For further advancement, you should also give up the means. That is, you should not become attached to the process of liberation itself. So we are seeing that in this section of Srimad Bhagavatam, the instructions that Lord Rishabdev is imparting to his 100 sons. And prior to this particular verse, we read how Lord Rishabdev is explaining some of the very fundamental principles of human life, which needs to be followed very diligently. And in this particular verse, he explains the prayojan, the result. What would be the result if these principles of human life that are being explained by Lord Rishabdev are followed in a very diligent manner? He's mentioning that you will be free from the desire for creative activities. Essentially, these principles, when executed in a proper manner, one is freed from the desire to enjoy the results that accrue out of one's endeavor in this world. And he also mentions that by doing so, you will be able to sever the knot of bondage within the heart. And these principles that Lord Rishabdev is enunciating herein may sound to be very simple, may sound to be very, that we may have heard it many a times before. But then repeatedly hearing these basic principles is something that's very much important for us. And we might fall into a trap wherein, we might take these instructions for granted. One time, Srila Prabhupada was asked by, one of his one of the devotees, and the devotee asked Srila Prabhupada that, Srila Prabhupada, in every lecture that we hear from you, you repeatedly emphasize about this point that, we are not this body, we are the spirit soul. You know, but then why is that every time you ought to repeat this? We find this statement out there in your books everywhere, and in practically every lecture you repeat this point. And Srila Prabhupada said that yes, even after repeatedly mentioning this, it is so difficult to understand. It is so difficult for people to comprehend that we are not actually this body, but we are the eternal spirit souls, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. And Srila Prabhupada gives a very brilliant purport here to this verse. And he essentially, in this particular purport, he delineates the process of development of Krishna consciousness, for a sadhaka. How a sadhaka, he progresses on the path of Krishna consciousness. And he mentions that the very first stage that one is in is search for absolute truth. When a person is inquisitive to know about the absolute truth, he's searching all around, he's looking out for answers to his queries. And Prabhupada mentions that these answers, this search is very much valid till the point one comes to the platform of Krishna consciousness. Once a person arrives in the course of his search to the proper understanding of the supreme absolute truth, he is situated on the self-realized state, the Brahma Bhuta stage. So Prabhupada mentions that how from the Brahma Jigyasa stage, he moves on to the Brahma Bhuta stage, where he understands that, yes, I am not this body, I am the eternal spirit soul, part and parcel of Krishna. And that further understanding about his own identity, about when he reaches this Brahma Bhuta state, he also understands, he comes to know about his duty. What is his duty? What is he supposed to do, upon gaining this knowledge? And that is when he progresses further onto the transcendental stage of rendering devotional service to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. And Prabhupada calls this stage as the stage of Parabhakti. He mentions that ultimately the idea is to enter into Parabhakti, or the transcendental devotional service of the Supreme Lord. So this is the regular process. The regular process is being explained, which moves from the stage of searching for the absolute truth, search, to the stage of self-realization, to the stage of service. And these three stages are very beautifully characterized in the Bhagavad Gita as the stage of Athato Brahma Jigyasa. From the very beginning, the living being, the Vedanta Sutra mentions Athato Brahma Jigyasa. Athato means the word therefore. Therefore, one should inquire about the absolute truth. Now, it's very surprising that a great piece of literature, the Vedanta Sutra, which is a which is a summary study of the Srimad, which is the summary study of all the four Vedas, and such a piece of literature, the Vedanta Sutra, begins with this aphorism, Athato Brahma Jigyasa. Therefore, you should inquire about the absolute truth. Now, typically, whenever we hear this word therefore, the word therefore is used as a conclusion to something. When something is being presented as a hypothesis, and when that hypothesis is proved by a set of facts, and then at the end of that presentation, there is a conclusion. So whenever this word therefore is used, the word therefore is used as a concluding sentence. But we see that the Vedanta Sutra begins with this aphorism, Athato, therefore one should inquire about the absolute truth. The reason the acharyas explain is because it is only a human being who can approach a literature like the Vedanta Sutra. So it goes without saying that anyone who is able to access the aphorisms of Vedanta Sutra, anyone who is able to read the Vedanta Sutra, is blessed with a human form of life. And therefore, Vedanta Sutra mentions that now that you have achieved this human form of life, now it is your prime duty to inquire about the supreme absolute truth. So that is the stage of searching for the absolute truth. And thereafter the person moves to the stage of Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma, when he understands that, I'm an eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. He is, happy within. He's pleased. He's satisfied deep within his heart. That is the stage of Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma, which Srila Prabhupada quotes in this particular purport. And then finally he comes to the stage of rendering devotional service to the Lord and Master, to his Supreme Lord. And this stage Prabhupada refers as Mam Chayo Abhyabhicharena Bhakti Yogena Sevate. So when one engages in the process of Bhakti Yoga, that's when one reaches the stage of transcendental devotional service. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the seventh chapter, Krishna explains 4 types of people who approach him, who come to him. And he mentions these 4 types of people as Arto, Jigyasur, Arto, Artharti, Jigyasur, and Jnani. So Arto is the distressed person who is like, tormented by material miseries. He's a Artha. Then there is the Artharthi, a person who is looking for wealth in his life, one who is looking for opulence in his life. Such a person also approaches Krishna. The third person is the person who is inquiring about the absolute truth, the Jigyasu. And the final is the Jnani, one who knows perfectly what's his duty and and he's engaging himself in the duty of rendering devotional service to the Lord. And Krishna mentions that out of these 4 people, he considers Jnani to be the best. This is the 17th verse he mentions. And he gives the reason that because of being free of material desires, you know, this Jnani is considered to be the best, because the others have a tinge of selfish desire while they are executing devotional service. Krishna says karma mishra bhakti. And to in one of his purports to this particular verse, Labandev Vidya Bhushan, he mentions that Krishna is so pleased with this category, the Jnani category, that he doesn't just say that he's the best, but he also says that such a person is very much dear to me. And he mentions, for going back to Godhead, for coming back to me, others also need to come over to that stage, the stage of Mam Chayo Abhyabhicharena Bhakti Yogena Sevate. And Krishna mentions that Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavan Mam Prapadyate Vasudevam Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabham. And when we read, these 4 categories, the distressed category, the seeker of wealth, the inquisitive category, and the Jnani category, and we read the version of Krishna, we read the verdict of Krishna, that Krishna is mentioning that for being able to come to him, one needs to come to the platform of rendering devotional service unto him. And we find that in our case, I mean, not many of us actually inquired about the absolute truth. Not many of us endeavor to inquire about the absolute truth, and not many of us actually made that endeavor to dig into the scriptures and try to find out the nature of the absolute truth, and understand about our own position, and understand about our own duty as the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And we find that because of some rare fortune, we have been directly awarded, we have been directly gifted with the opportunity to execute transcendental loving devotional service to the Supreme Lord Krishna. And because of this mercy of Srila Prabhupada, we have been able to kind of surpass the stage of searching and self-realization, and just by rendering the process of devotional service slowly and gradually, Krishna reveals the transcendent knowledge from within the heart to the practicing devotee, to the sadhaka. And in this particular purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that this process of rendering practical devotional service, pure devotional service, this includes the process of knowledge development and realization. So, on one hand, we may feel very fortunate that we have been saved from a lot of endeavor, which ascetics and saints from time immemorial they have been endeavoring to inquire about the nature of the absolute, executing very austere penances and doing all sorts of austerities. But then, on one hand, we feel happy that we have been gifted with this process of Krishna consciousness, that we can directly, engage in the service of the Lord. But then, there is a catch here. Lord Rishabdev is giving a warning signal here, giving us that he has that asterisk, and he's mentioning that condition, that one should carefully cultivate the instructions of the spiritual master. He says that the results of this devotional service will be experienced only when one is able to carefully cultivate the instructions of the spiritual master. And he refers to this particular thing by the word apramattaha. Mattaha means to be mad, and pramattaha means you know, to be mad to a great degree. And what does this madness actually mean? This madness refers to the ignorance or actions in illusion of the material energy. We'll discuss on this a bit more elaborately. But then this is something that is very much important for us to focus on, that having been blessed with the process of Krishna consciousness and having embarked upon this journey to please Krishna, how do we ensure that we carefully cultivate and do not put aside the instructions of the self-realized souls that we receive, the instructions that we receive on this process. And we find in the Shastras, we find in the Srimad Bhagavatam itself, that there have been many devotees who, by following this particular principles, they have become successful. We see the example of Dhruv Maharaj. Dhruv Maharaj was instructed by Shri Narad Muni in the forest of Vrindavan, the Mahavan forest, in the process of worshipping the Supreme Lord. And he was asked to perform worship to the Supreme Lord in a particular manner by Narad Muni. And we find from the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam how Dhruv Maharaj so very diligently executed the orders of his spiritual master, Narad Muni. And with the passage of time, Dhruv Maharaj was also evaluating whether his following of the instructions is proper or not. And we find that the moment Dhruv Maharaj used to understand that maybe I'm not experiencing the results as it was told to me by Narad Muni, therefore I may need to intensify my practice of the instructions. And we find how Dhruv Maharaj moved on from one stage to the other to a much higher stage, and stages that hardly any of us could even imagine for us to follow. And we find that eventually, being very much diligent and carefully cultivating the instructions of his spiritual master Narad Muni, he finally achieved the desired result in the form of the darshan of the Lord, in the form of the blessings of the Lord. And he was blessed with not only the material desire that he had, but much more and beyond. And we find the examples of the prachetas. The prachetas were instructed in the science of Krishna consciousness by Lord Shiva himself. And we find that how they were so much empowered by the instructions of Lord Shiva, and they went on to rule the entire planet Earth for many, many thousands of years. And therefore it's very important for us to understand that how fortunate are we to have been blessed by similar instructions of great acharyas like Srila Prabhupada. And Chaitanya Charitamrita mentions Brahmand Brahmite kono bhagyavan jeev Guru Krishna prasade pai bhakti lata bij. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there is a beautiful conversation which Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has with Prakashananda Saraswati. And Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is speaking about himself, that how he himself has been trying to execute the instructions that were given to him by his spiritual master. And he mentions, "Ei tar vakye ami dridha vishwas dhari, निरंतर कृष्ण नाम संकीर्तन करी, sei Krishna नाम कभु गायो याय नाचाय, gahi nachi nahi ami apana ichhai." This is from the Madhya Lila, from the Adi Lila. No, sorry, this is from the Madhya Lila. He says, "I firmly believe in these words of my spiritual master, and I always chant the holy name of the Lord alone and in the association of devotees. That holy name of Lord Krishna sometimes causes me to chant and dance, and therefore I chant and dance. Please do not think that I intentionally do it. I do it automatically." So herein Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is himself admitting, when he was questioned by Prakashanand Saraswati, that why don't you study the Vedanta? Why are you so busy just chanting the holy names of the Lord? And herein Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is explaining that he was instructed to do so by his spiritual master Srila Ishwarapuri. And because of having this firm faith in the words of his spiritual master, he has been experiencing this ecstasy within his heart. And he's mentioning that this instruction sometimes causes me to chant and dance, and therefore I chant and dance. I'm not doing it intentionally, he's mentioning, but in fact I do it automatically. And Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport to this particular verse, wherein he says that he quotes from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, and he says, "Yasya deve para bhaktir yatha deve tatha gurau, tasyaita katitha yartha prakashante mahatmanah." He says that only unto those great souls who have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master are all the imports of the Vedic knowledge automatically revealed. This Vedic injunction is very important, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu supported it by his personal behavior. And Srila Prabhupada speaks about himself, that how just by following the instructions of his spiritual master, he has been able to achieve whatever he has been, whatever success he has experienced in preaching the process of Krishna consciousness all over the world. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the purport to the verse Tad Vidhi Pranipatena, Srila Prabhupada emphasizes further on the importance of following the instructions of the spiritual master. And there are some very golden words that Srila Prabhupada pens out here. He says that the path of spiritual realization is undoubtedly difficult. I repeat, the path of spiritual realization is undoubtedly difficult. The Lord therefore advises us to approach a bona fide spiritual master in the line of disciplic succession from the Lord himself. The Bhagavatam says, "Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam." The path of religion is directly enunciated by the Lord. Satisfaction of the self-realized spiritual master is the secret of advancement in spiritual life. So he gives this clue out here, that the satisfaction of the self-realized spiritual master is the secret of advancement in spiritual life. So the next question that automatically comes up is, how does one ensure that one satisfies the self-realized spiritual master? And Lord Rishabdev is mentioning once again, the word apramattah, not being covered by ignorance or illusion. being very careful, because the nature of the material world, the material nature, is said to have twofold impact on the living entity. The the material nature functions in these twofold ways: through the process of avaranatmika shakti, by which the material nature covers the true identity of the spiritual soul, avaran atmika shakti, and then prakshepatmika shakti. The living entity is transported into a conception of believing himself to be the controller, to be the supreme enjoyer, and to be the maintainer of everything that is within his purview. And the result is, we repeatedly get distracted, when we are kind of covered with this process of the material energy by this avaranatmika shakti. We repeatedly get distracted from our priorities, from our goal of rendering devotional service. And therefore, the words of the Shastras, the shlokas of Srimad Bhagavatam, they keep bringing us back on track. These verses that we are reading today in the Srimad Bhagavatam, these verses are meant to bring our priorities back into place. That how, as the eternal living beings, as the eternal part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we are meant to be engaged in his service. That has to be the priority in our own lives. Just like the example is given that when a flight is airborne, when an aircraft is flying high up in the air, it is mentioned that 99% of the time the aircraft is off track. But the job of the pilot, the responsibility of the pilot, is to ensure that he keeps on bringing the aircraft back onto the track. And that's how we see the words of Srimad Bhagavatam. They keep us bringing, they keep us aligning back onto our priorities. And I'll just explain this beautiful pastime from Ramayana. How in the Ramayana also we find the example of Sugriva, who gets distracted from his priority, and he goes off track. And we find this pastime in the Kiskinda Kshetra of Ramayana, wherein there is a pact that is made between Ram and Sugriva, and both there's this agreement that's made wherein each of them, they promise to each other. Sugriva says that my wife has been kidnapped by Vali, and if you can help me rescue my wife from the clutches of Vali, then I'll employ the entire Vanara Sena under my control, under my supervision, to look out for Sita. So this agreement is made, and Lord Ramachandra, he fights with Vali, he kills Vali, and he rescues Tara, and that's how Sugriva is pleased. That's how Lord Ramchandra, he lives up to his promise. But then the 4 month of rainy season commences, and Sugriva says that it's difficult for the Vanaras to go out and search for Mother Sita in such a situation. Therefore, we'll have to wait for these 4 months. And that's when Lord Sri Ramachandra, along with Lakshman, they're waiting on the Malyavanta Parvat in the Kistinda Kshetra, and they're waiting for the rainy season to end. And after the rainy season ends, after the 4 months of the rainy season, the Chaturmas is over. In the meantime, Sugriva becomes, comfortable. Sugriva is, he forgets his promise that he's meant to also reciprocate to the favor done to him by Lord Rama. And Sugriva is busy in sense gratification. He just forgets his promise. And when Lord Sri Ram, he sees that Sugriva has forgotten his promise, he asks Lakshman to go and remind Sugriva about the agreement, about the promise that he had made. And Lakshman, true to his nature, he says that, Sugriva has committed a very big offense to have neglected your instructions, and therefore instead of just reminding Sugriva, I'll just go and finish off Sugriva. But then Lord Ramachandra, he consoles Lakshman and he says that no, that won't solve the purpose. And therefore, you just go and remind Sugriva about his duty. And that's when Lord Lakshman, he goes to the place where Sugriva is staying. Now, on the side of Sugriva, it is Hanumanji who, first of all, sees that Lakshman has come. And Hanumanji is able to put all the pieces together and is able to understand that, Sugriva is very much busy in his comfortable situation now. He's just busy with sense gratification. And Lakshman is so angry and he has come to remind Sugriva. So even before Lakshman meets Sugriva, Lord Hanumanji, he approaches Sugriva and he reminds Sugriva, he says to Sugriva that what you have done is something which is unforgivable, something that cannot be forgiven. You have not lived up to the promise that you have made. And he mentions this beautiful verse from the Ramayana. He says, Krita paradhasya hite na anyat pashyami aham kshamam antare anjalim badhva lakshmanasya prasadanat. He mentions Krita paradhasya hite. You have done something which is not in your favor. ये आपके हित में नहीं है. Lord Hanuman is mentioning that this is not something that's going to prove beneficial for you. You have not lived up to your promise, and therefore, you have difficult time ahead. He says, "Na anyat pashyami aham kshamam." To forgive you from this offense, I can't see any other way except one. And Hanumanji, he gives this beautiful way out for Sugriva. He says, Antare Anjalim Badhva. Anjali refers to the folded hands. When one folds his hand in supplication and forgiveness, and Hanumanji is mentioning, Antare Anjalim Badhva. You should internally, deep within your heart, you should feel repentant about your misdeed, about the mistake that you have committed. Because many times it's very easy to beg forgiveness externally, but here Hanumanji is suggesting Sugriva how there has to be an internal feeling of remorse, internal feeling of repentance. Antare Anjalim Badhva Lakshmanasya Prasadanat. He mentions that only when you feel that repentance internally will you receive the mercy of Lakshman. And Lakshman is here the spiritual master, is representing the Guru who has come with the message of the Supreme Lord Ramchandra. And he says that this is how you will actually receive the mercy of the spiritual master. Now, this particular pastime shows that, yes, just like Sugriva, many times, even as practicing devotees, the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam mentions that how when a living being, every person in the womb of his mother, within the womb, every living being experiences such intense misery while in the womb that the living being actually prays. There is a chapter in the Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto, prayers by the living entity within the womb. And the living being prays to the Supreme Lord that, my dear Lord, if you can just relieve me from this miserable situation, I promise that I will devote rest of my life to your service. So having made this promise, the moment the living being comes into the material world, he is put within the purview of the material nature and he forgets his promise, the promise that he had made to the Supreme Lord in the womb. So what could be the recourse to that? And Hanumanji is giving this solution here that yes, we may have forgotten our promise to the Supreme Lord, but then if we can also feel that repentance within the heart, Antare Anjalim Badhva Lakshmanasya Prasadana, that is how we'll receive the mercy of the Supreme Lord through the medium of the spiritual master. And we see, through this beautiful example, Hanumanji is mentioning that how can one be actually very careful in ensuring that one receives the mercy of the spiritual master. There is another beautiful story from the Ramayana wherein we find this particular devotee achieves success in her life merely by very meticulously following the instructions of her spiritual master. And this is again the story from the Kishkinda Kanda of Ramayana, the story of Shabari. And the story goes that how Shabari, she resided on the Hemakuta mountain, and she was the young daughter of a hunter of the Shabara community. And it is mentioned that on the day prior to her marriage, she finds that her father has got many thousands of goats and sheep to be sacrificed, and to feed everyone as per the tradition of that particular community for the marriage of Shabari. And when Shabari sees young Shabari as a young girl, she sees that just for her marriage so many living beings are to be sacrificed. She feels very repentant, and it is mentioned that early the morning of her marriage she just leaves her home and runs into the forest. And as a young girl, she is very much confused as to what should she be doing now. And it's mentioned that she starts looking out for someone who can give her spiritual knowledge. And because she belongs from a very low community, from the Shabara community, most of the sages and ascetics who stay on the Hemakunda mountain, they don't accept her. So no one is accepting her because she belongs from this low caste. But finally sage Matanga Rishi, he accepts her. And even upon being even upon being like uh, being held responsible, even upon being chastised by the other sages. Sage Matanga, he mentions that because someone has come with a true desire to understand about the supreme absolute truth, and therefore this criteria is sufficient. And Matanga Rishi accepts Shabari as her disciple. And Shabari, she stays with Matanga Rishi all through her life, and she literally becomes the personification of Guru Seva, and she even attains perfection in that process. And having served her Guru Matanga Rishi throughout her life, she becomes very dear to Matanga Rishi. And at the time of giving up his body, Matanga Rishi, he says that you have served me all through my life so very diligently. Is there anything I can give you? So Shabari says that you have perfected your life by meditating on the Supreme Lord, and therefore I also want to give up my life just by just by rendering service to you. And now that you won't be before me, I would like to give up my body. But Matanga Rishi, he consoles her and he says that Agimya agamishyati te Rama supanyam ima ashramam, that you wait here, the Supreme Lord is himself coming, and then you can attain perfection. And that's how, following the words of her spiritual master, Shabari stays there. And it is mentioned that she would offer flowers and fruits to that place every day, to the place of Matanga Rishi. And with every passing day, she waited patiently for the Lord to come. And all the other sages, they very much dejected her. They very much kind of hated her for being around just because she belonged from a low caste community. And it is mentioned that close to the ashram of Matanga Rishi was the Pampa Sarovar. And it is mentioned that one time Shabari, she went on to Pampa Sarovar to fill some water, and her shadow falls on one of the ascetics who were who was doing tapasya there, and this sage, he's like he's furious, and he picks up a stone and throws at Shabari, and she starts to bleed, and a drop of her blood falls into the Pampa Sarovar, and immediately the entire Pampa Sarovar becomes blood red. And seeing this, the sage is even more angry, and Shabari sees the entire scene and she runs away. And then this particular sage, he calls all the other sages, and he shows that, look what this low caste girl has done. And all the other sages, they start to find out ways and means how to bring about Pangvasar, how to purify it once again. But then no matter what they do, they are just unsuccessful. And then one of the persons, he says that the Supreme Lord Ramchandra and Lakshman, his brother Lakshman, is around in this area, and maybe if we call him and ask him to purify, maybe then the Pampa Sarovar will be purified. So these people, they approach Lord Ramchandra, and they come and they show him that this is what has happened, and maybe if you can touch these waters, Pampa Sarovar will be once again purified. So but then Lord Ramchandra, he also touches the Pampa Sarovar, but still there is no effect, and Lord Ram is himself confused. And then he asks that, how did this happen? And then the sages, they narrate the entire incident, and that's how Lord Ramchandra says that because you have criticized a great devotee like Shabari, therefore you have met this fate. And I would like to meet this person. And it is mentioned by this time Shabari had become very old, and just by hearing this particular incident that Lord Ramchandra has come, Shabari, even in spite of being very old, she starts running to meet Lord Ramchandra. And it is mentioned that on course of her running, some dust from her lotus feet, those particles of dust, they fall into Pampa Sarovar. And just by the falling of that dust, the Pampa Sarovar once again becomes purified. And seeing this, all the sages and everyone around is like completely astonished. And Shabari, that's when Shabari comes before Lord Ramchandra, and she invites Lord Ram and Lakshman to her hermitage and offers him a seat. And it is mentioned that Lord Ramchandra, on the course of searching for Mother Sita, on the advice of Kabanda, Lord Ramchandra was advised to go to Pampa Sarovar, on the banks of the Rishimukha mountains, on the foothills of the Rishimukha mountains, to this Pampa Sarovar. And that's how Lord Ramchandra was in that particular area. Now, the conversation that happens between Lord Ram and Shabari is something very instructional for us as practicing devotees, as sadhakas. So Lord Ramchandra, he asks Shabari, कच्चित्ते निर्जिता विघ्न कच्चित्ते वर्धते तपः कच्चित्ते नियतः क्रोध आहारश्चन तपोधने कश्चित्ते नियमः प्राप्तः कश्चित्ते मनसः सुखम् कस् कश्चित्वे गुरु शुश्रूषा सफला चारु भाषिणी. Lord Ramchandra is asking that, are there any obstacles in your practice of devotion, in your tapasya? Have you controlled your anger? Are you peaceful within your mind? And are you being able to follow what you have heard from your guru? And here Lord Ramchandra is not asking that, what did you have in prasad today, or how's your health, you're doing fine, and etc. So these conversations basically teach us that whenever we meet a great person, what should be our inquiry. And similarly, we find the inquiries in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that these are the kind of questions that are being asked. And the last word is very significant, where Lord Ramchandra is addressing Shabari as Charu Bhashini. No, Charu Bhashini means someone who is very soft spoken or very, one whose words are very soothing to hear. Charu Bhashini. But then here it is mentioned that Shabari had not even spoken till now. So how did Lord Ramachandra address Shabari as Charu Bhashini? Whereas Shabari hadn't spoken a word before Lord Ramchandra. So Acharyas explained that because her actions of welcoming Lord Ramchandra and her actions of respecting Ram and Lakshman spoke much louder about her nobility. And just by her actions, Lord Ramchandra could understand that she is a person of very noble character. And having been asked these questions, Shabari further answers Lord Ram's questions very beautifully. And she says that your darshan today has made my tapasya attain perfection. She says that my birth has become meaningful today. By your cooling glance, my mind is completely purified. And it is only by your mercy today that I have achieved the perfection of my Guru Puja, and I'll surely go to the eternal abode. So just by having audience of the Supreme Lord, Shabri is completely pacified within her heart, and she feels that, you know, all her tapasya is successful today. She finds all her service rendered to the spiritual master, to her spiritual master Matanga Rishi, has attained perfection today. And before Lord Ramchandra, she asks permission from Lord Ramchandra to give up this, body and to attain the lotus feet of her spiritual master. So this is a very beautiful example of Acharya Nishtha, wherein, it is mentioned that the perfection of life is to attain the darshan of the Supreme Lord, attain the service of the Supreme Lord. And here was Shabari, who had attained personal darshan of Lord Ramchandra himself, who had attained the, you know beautiful opportunity of having fed these berries to Lord Ram and Lakshman, and rendered the service to Lord Ram and Lakshman. But now Shabari doesn't consider this as perfection of her life, but then she's asking permission from the Lord himself, who is right in front of her, to attain the lotus feet of her spiritual master. And Lord Ramchandra is so very much impressed with her devotion, and Lord Ramchandra appreciates her devotion in these beautiful way, in these beautiful words, wherein he says, Archito aham toya bhaktya gaccha kamam yatha sukham. He says that you have worshipped me with devotion, and I am completely pleased by your service. Now you may go with pleasure to the world you desire. You desire to go to the lotus feet of your spiritual master. I give you this permission. I bless you that may you achieve the perfection, may you achieve the lotus feet of your spiritual master. And right before Lord Ramchandra, it is mentioned that Shabari, she arranges for her pyre, lights up the fire, sits on the fire, and while offering her pranam to Lord Ramchandra, she leaves her body. And her body, it is mentioned that, is burned within no time. And right out of the fire there appears a beautiful form, the beautiful spiritual form, which ascends into the air and goes to the spiritual world. And this beautiful example of Shabari is something very much instructional, that how just by meticulously and diligently following following the instructions of the spiritual master, one actually achieves not only the audience of the Lord, not only the service to the Lord, but also achieves the perfection of residing in the eternal spiritual abode of the Supreme Lord. And it is mentioned that her devotion to Guru was so great that even though Lord Ramchandra was standing there, she wanted to attain the lotus feet of Guru. And having seen this, the Supreme Lord Sri Ramchandra himself was wonderstruck. So all of these examples, we find that Lord Hanuman, advising Sugriva how can one achieve the mercy of the spiritual master. Antare Anjalim Badva Lakshmanasya Prasadanat. And then we see the example of Shabri. These beautiful personalities, these beautiful instructions give us the hope that yes, if we also follow in the footsteps of these devotees, if we also following these instructions very diligently, definitely we'll also be successful in carefully carrying out the instructions of our spiritual master. So just to summarize all that we have been discussing today, we began by discussing that how Lord Rishabdev is encouraging his sons to carefully follow the instructions that are imparted by him, which may sound to be very basic, but at the same time, they're very, very much important to imbibe very deeply within the heart and contemplate and follow those instructions. And we saw the example how Srila Prabhupada, he mentions in the purports of the Bhagavad Gita that how the secret of advancement in spiritual master is the satisfaction of the self-realized spiritual master. And we saw the example of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself extolling the experience, explaining about the experience that he was having by following the instructions of his spiritual master Ishwarapuri. We saw the example of the Prachetas having followed the instructions of Lord Shiva in a diligent manner. We saw the example of Dhruv Maharaj following the instructions of Narad Muni, and Srila Prabhupada mentioning about himself. And thereafter we saw that how while following these instructions, one shouldn't be apramattah, one shouldn't be covered by ignorance or illusion, thinking oneself to be the enjoyer, being surrounded by comforts or facilities for sense gratification around. We saw the example of Sugriva, that how Sugriva, he went astray, how Sugriva, he lost track of his priorities, and he failed to keep his word, what he had given to the Supreme Lord, what he had promised to Ram and Lakshman, and how he was corrected by Hanumanji at the proper time. And thereafter we saw the brilliant example of Shabari, who attained perfection by following the instructions of her spiritual master. And therefore, when we read these beautiful stories from the Srimad Bhagavatam, from the Ramayana, from the Bhagavad Gita, these stories, these instructions of the scriptures, they repeatedly endeavor to bring us back on track. They repeatedly endeavor to bring our priorities back into place. And the more we align ourselves with the instructions of the scriptures, the more we keep these instructions close to our heart, the more we'll be aware of how to keep taking steps in our practice of devotional service. And that's how we'll also surely and definitely become successful in following the words of Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. With those words, I'd like to stop here. Thank you all very much for your time and for being here this morning to hear from the words of Srimad Bhagavatam. Jai Grantraj Srimad Bhagavat Mahapuran ki Jai. His Divine Grace Grace Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai. If you have any questions, we can take a few questions.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Very nice class, and very nicely you explained.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Can you hear me, Prabhuji? Oh, Prabhu, you are muted, Prabhuji.
Hi, yes, Mataji, I can hear you.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for the beautiful, beautiful class. It was very nice class, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you for the beautiful class.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare
Dandavat
Krishna,
pranam.
Vanshidhare Gopal Prabhu. Dandavat pranam, Prabhu.
Yeah, so Prabhuji, like in the translation, in the second line, it was mentioned that that we should not be attached to the process itself. So what does that really mean, Prabhuji? Like the process of self-realization itself, or I did not understand that part clearly, Prabhuji.
Yeah. So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport, and Srila Prabhupada mentions that how there are these three stages: the stages of searching for the absolute truth, the stage of the stage of gaining knowledge, and then the practice of yoga. That is the second stage, wherein a person is the Brahma Bhuta stage, the stage of self-realization, and finally the stage of devotional service. So essentially, what this means is once a person comes to the platform of rendering devotional service to the Supreme Lord, one shouldn't again go out looking for something higher. There is something else which is which is left out, which is not conveyed to me by the words of Guru, Sadhu and Shastra. No. So this is what it essentially means, that once we have been blessed with the essence, there is no need to once again go out and search, to reinvent the wheel. We have been given the essence, just like, if someone wants to taste a mango, and someone else is given a glass, mango shake, a glass full of mango shake. So instead of experiencing just drinking that mango shake, if someone goes out and starts looking out for a mango tree, that doesn't make sense, right? So similarly, when Srila Prabhupada mentions, even Lord Rishabdev, he mentions that one should, one should not follow the, what was that? One should, one second. Yeah, one should not become attached to the process of liberation itself. So this process of liberation is the process of Brahma Jigyasa and the Brahma Bhuta platform. So one shouldn't once again go out searching, and one shouldn't keep himself attached to just accomplishing jnana, because Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that tesham nityabhiyuktana. No, he mentions that to one who is very much attached to serving me with devotion, Tesham nityabhiyuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. So he mentions that anyone who is worshipping me with devotion, I from within give him the knowledge by which he can come to me. So there is no need for us to keep looking out for some knowledge, or keep looking out for some practice of jnana, because everything is included within the package of devotional service itself. So I guess that's how I understand this particular verse. Hope that's clear, Prabhu.
Yeah, yes, Prabhuji, it's very clear now, because I was just reading Uddhav Gita yesterday, and in that also it is mentioned that once you reach that stage, then you give up that meditative process itself, because there is no need. So that part I was not able to connect in this context. So yeah, now it becomes very clear. Thank you. So Prabhuji, I have one more question, if I may ask.
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, so you quoted all the examples of like following the instruction of a spiritual master. So in these examples, like they were very fortunate to get a personal instruction from the spiritual master. But sometimes, like for example, in my case, like I didn't get any specific personal instruction from a spiritual master. So in that way, we can understand that just following his general instruction, like following the regulative principles, being serve the devotees and stay on the path, if we remain committed like that will satisfy him. So is that correct understanding?
That's very much true, Prabhu, because if we look at the example of Srila Prabhupada, we find that Srila Prabhupada very much knew that his society is not going to be limited to just just a mere thousands of followers. He envisioned a society, a worldwide society, an international society, where there would be multitudes of devotees, and he had that big plan in his mind. Srila Prabhupada always said that I have a problem that I can't think small. I always think big. And what you're mentioning today is something that Srila Prabhupada knew very well in advance, that it might not be possible, just like in the bygone ages, disciples used to receive instructions on a personal basis. So Srila Prabhupada understood that when there is a worldwide movement in place, it might not be possible that each of the person receives a personal specific thing that holds true only for that particular disciple. And therefore Srila Prabhupada, he has put in so many instructions in a generic format in his translations, in his purports. And those instructions are literally, they actually have the same potency. By following those instructions, we definitely receive the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, the mercy of our own spiritual master, because the spiritual master is pleased when we endeavor to please the acharyas. So there is no separate way of pleasing the spiritual master. And when we when we hold the instructions of Srila Prabhupada as enunciated in his purports, as explained in his classes, in his conversations, and when we live by those instructions, definitely we receive the mercy of our own spiritual master and the mercy of the Supreme Lord Krishna himself.
Yes. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, if we don't have any questions, we can end the call.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you so much for wonderful class, Prabhu. Does anybody have any questions or realizations you want to share with Prabhuji? If nobody have any question, can we end the call here? Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for your enlightening class today. We are very grateful to you, Prabhu. We look forward for your session again and again in the future, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Let us pay obeisances to Prabhuji and all the devotees. Vancha kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhuvasya Pitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Rantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. His great Chaitanya Lila Prabhuji ki jai. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Hare
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Thank you for the wonderful class, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all devotees. Hare Bol.
Hare Hare.